Good, beautiful day, everyone. I wanted to say good morning, then I realized it's not morning, it's good evening, everyone. Hope you're having a brilliant day. It is Thursday today. Just a reminder, it's Thursday in the United States and Canada, and it's 19th Friday in APAC and in other parts of the world. I want to thank all of you for coming on today. It's truly an honor to have the space and to share the space with all of you. This is part two of dismantling discrimination and enabling diversity through friendships. This series is made possible by Chief of Hearts, a culture science company. I am your host, Millie Dufour, founder of Chief of Hearts. I'm really excited that I have got five brilliant guests today, but before I bring them on, I want to talk a little bit about why we are doing this, why this is such an important series to have. BLM has definitely catalyzed awareness on the lack of equity and humane treatment in our society as a whole. This movement has powerfully pushed the whole world to speak about discrimination courageously, and that means even at the workplace. Discrimination and bullying happens at the workplace, and according to Harvard research, 25 to 50% of people experience bullying or discrimination at some point in their careers. When we have systems, policies, enact people in place to gatekeep others, equity will never become possible. Last week, I sat with five other women of color from different parts of the world to engage in a conversation to hear their struggles and how they have navigated through the discourse landscape throughout their whole lives. Now, to dismantle discrimination, racism, and to enable change, we must have real, honest conversations about struggles of the dismissed. In addition to that, we must have these difficult, honest conversations with various ethnic groups where colorism is inherently present that creates an internal marginalized incubator specific to ethnic groups. Discrimination is prevalent in Asian countries as well, countries like Singapore, Malaysia, India, and other diverse Asian communities around the globe. And today, we want to talk about this systemic placement, right? This systemic placements can further displace each other from resources and attaining equity. In order to find solutions for the largest scope, we have to create allies, right? Allies, that should be allyships, partnerships, sponsorships through hardship. And and this should be within communities that segregate through colorism, class, and caste, and more. Today, we'll be speaking on colorism and tokenism amongst other themes within the Asian community and how discrimination exists and how we can execute on solutions. To explore further, I have brilliant guests today. I'm so honored to bring them on. And let me bring on one by one. But first, let me introduce my first panelist, Melanie D. Guzman. She is a public speaker, a mentor, a co-founder of Women in Technology Group in Toronto, Canada, and is a digital media professional. And my second guest for tonight is Uma Thomas. For her day job, Uma is Vice President and Channel Chief for Asia, Pacific, and Japan at VMware, which covers 48 markets in Asia. She is also the co-founder of Lean In Singapore, founder of Lean In Women in Technology Asia and Women in Technology Singapore, with a focus to empower women to achieve their ambitions. So let's bring Uma on. And my next guest is Sabrina Meherati. She is a future of work thought leader and the founder of Designing for Inclusion. Her consulting practice is informed by over a decade of progressive experience in human resources, product management, and design thinking. Let's bring her on. And my next guest is Chris Lin. He is an advocate of leading people first through his work on developing organizations and talent. His belief is by investing in individuals, molding the experience, and guiding their journey, we can create a positive learning culture that blooms into a thriving organization. Let's bring on Chris. Welcome, everyone. How is everyone doing?
Hello.
Great to see everyone.
Hey.
Great to see you, Mila. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. So just to go around, we are a global panel. So just so our viewers and listeners out there, Melanie, which area are you coming live from?
I am coming to you live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Hello, everyone.
Uma, where are you live from?
Well, it's 7:08 a.m. in Singapore. Nice to see all of you.
Sabrina.
Hello, I am here from the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people in Vancouver, Canada.
Chris.
Hello, and I'm coming from San Francisco Bay Area.
All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm really, really excited to discuss about this at a very granular grassroots level, right? With whatever's going on. To start off the conversation, each of you are from different parts of the world. How does discrimination or racism manifest in your locations? And how does that impact someone from having access to resources and tools? I want to open up. Who would like to go first?
I can go first. All right, so just to give some context. So yes, I'm coming to you from Toronto, but I was born and raised in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada, which in the 80s is or was a predominantly white community. And my parents had to make the hard decision to basically let go of their culture in order to give my sister and I an easier life. And by that, I mean by not teaching us how to speak our native language, Tagalog, by westernizing our food diets, all to accommodate a system that just didn't know how to embrace different cultures. But now that I live in Toronto, Canada, which is so multicultural, like that's one of the reasons why I love it here, my experience with discrimination usually comes in the form of microaggressions and unconscious biases, where it's hard to identify like when it's happening, and it isn't until after the fact. But then you go through this internal struggle where you don't want to admit that that was the reason, but if you take a step back, you're like, damn, like they were actually being racist. So that's my experience with that.
Well, I can go next. I guess we're all living a new reality right now. So perhaps one that's closest to all of us is the coronavirus. And, you know, it started here in Asia and it spread from China to the rest of the world. So I think there's been a lot of racist attacks against Asians that have just gone up because of that. And obviously there was a world leader that called it the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus, which is a characterization that many found insensitive, misleading, and even dangerous. So even as much as the virus is now a European or an American phenomenon, as an Asian one, I think the anti-Asian incidents continue. I remember when it first broke out in Singapore, and I was working out at a gym, and I had a Singaporean Chinese neighbor in her 60s that was working out with me. You know, she was saying to me, everywhere she was going, like people would be like, you know, distancing themselves from her because they just assume that because she looks Chinese, that she's from China. But as far as Singapore is concerned, we try to live up to non-discrimination ideals. It's very much in our national pledge, which aspires to equality regardless of race, language, or religion. And so the meritocracy concept is very popular here in Singapore, but the way that discrimination shows up is around disadvantage of personal characteristics. So whether it's race or ethnicity, religion or belief, nationality, you think about the foreign domestic workers that are here from mainly Philippines, for example, national or regional origin, sex and gender, disability, physical and mental health, sexual history, especially if you previously used to do sex work, marital history as well, reproductive history as well, and class background.
Beautiful. Sabrina, would you like to share?
Sure. Well, to echo all the descriptions that Uma gave, I think this is, that really does sum up the way or the different forms of discrimination that show up, not isolated to exclusively race, but understanding that there's intersectional aspects to discrimination. So, race, a couple overlaying with ability, for example, it just amplifies the forms of discrimination. For myself, I was born and raised here in Vancouver, Canada, and my parents both are immigrants. My mom is a refugee from Uganda, and my dad is from Pakistan. Both, I would say, ancestrally, I'm from India. Is the origin, the descent that I come from. I grew up, simply put, thinking that I was white for many years. I didn't know or identify with my own culture, similar to what Melanie was saying. It was a survival mechanism, really, that my parents instilled in me to not teach me our languages, to select the specific type of food that I would bring to school, making sure that it wasn't something that would be deemed smelly or strange or odd. And so I really looked at people within my own community and othered them, thinking that I wasn't like those people who decided to bring in their traditional food or who decided to speak in their language. And what that did is internally inside me, it created a divisiveness as well within me and my own community. So I, while I was a person of color, didn't really understand the treatment that I was experiencing, or until later on in my life where I became more aware of the reasons why this was happening and my own internalized racism as well. I think the way that discrimination shows up in our society, it's important to think about everything, any space we're in, any product we're using, any workplace we're in, who is not able to utilize it, who is not in the room. Just thinking about even like furniture, even looking at products and services that we create, and looking at, for example, there's Google came up with a Google Photos app where it was classifying people based on what it had identified, and put a couple of Black folks in the category of gorillas. And see, discrimination shows up through many different avenues, and I think we just need to be intentional in questioning, asking, and digging into that. So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Everything that Uma said absolutely is something that are ways that you can be discriminated against. And I can actually, Melanie and Sabrina, both of your upbringings resonate with myself as well. I grew up in a predominantly white town, and I personally, tried to fit in as much as possible and shed my own ethnicity as a defense mechanism to fit in, right? And so I think that's what happens as a society, is especially as just human beings in general, where we always have this need to try to fit in. It's a survival instinct that we have, right? Going thousands and thousands of years back, we're always trying to survive because anything that is different is perceived as bad. And we have this fear that's kicked in. And as we bring that into the workplace or into our cultures or our groups, our communities, we're always trying to find ways where we are alike. And anything that where we find ourselves as different is a red flag for us internally, whether or not we know it. And I think that that's where a lot of discrimination comes up. And as you see communities growing or organizations growing, you're constantly finding, oh, well, we're not like that group. And so that automatically creates barriers that do not allow for collaboration and unity. And so we need to find ways, as those are not prohibitive barriers. Those are things that should be celebrated and ways for us to be able to learn from each other.
A lot to digest, but very great experiences that each of you have shared. Now, my question, I'm really curious to learn more. I lived in different parts of the world. I was born in different parts of the world, grew up in different parts of the world. My question, Melanie, Chris, Sabrina, three of you shared that, you had to fit into a dominant culture, right? When you've tried to fit into a dominant culture, rejection happens as to whom you are and to whom you must become, the conformation aspect of it. My question is to all four of you. I know that there's a lot of internal discrimination even within the Asian communities that I've seen. Now, is that related with an identity marker, how each of us identify as? And when we see someone else, regardless whether if they're not the same kind of Asian, we immediately kind of like have to impose judgment on them, saying that, oh, I'm better, or we put them into stereotypical boxes because those are the kind of archetypes that we have seen on the telly or in the media or that we have been exposed to, which are part of the world that we grew up in. I want to hear your thoughts on this. And if that's the case, how do we dismantle that from a very granular level?
I mean, racism is not exclusive to any one group, right? And I think that, yes, we absolutely find that there are cultures or ethnicities that are discriminatory towards others. And even within our own ethnicities and groups that we find discriminations within each other. For me personally, growing up, born and raised here in the US, I've definitely dealt with discrimination against older generations of Chinese people. And automatically my first tag when I meet strangers is, oh, you're an ABC, right? You're an American-born Chinese. And that automatically is like, oh, well, yeah, I am. That's at face value, yes. But what that comes down to is, oh, you're not really Chinese because they don't see me individually as Chinese. And so, yes, we absolutely, I've experienced that myself, but I do believe that notion that, yes, we absolutely have intercultural and ethnical discrimination that we face and that we put against each other.
And to add to that, when I was living in Thunder Bay, I felt like I was, like Sabrina was said, like I didn't realize that the color of my skin even mattered until like later on in my life. Because even first of all, I didn't know any different. So I lived a life around white people, and that's all I ever knew. And I was lucky enough that one of the things my parents also did was that they put me in French immersion, which is Canada's second language. So, and it was a small cohort. So from JK until grade 9, I was with the same 45 people. So they grew up with me. So there wasn't any animosity over there. But what I found, I was so excited to come to Toronto, and I do love Toronto, but I remember when I came here and I tried to involve myself in the Filipino community, they're like, oh, you don't speak Tagalog. Oh, you don't do this. Oh, you don't know how to cook this. Oh, you don't sing karaoke. And it didn't feel welcoming. And that was within my own kind, like, being called a banana, that you're yellow on the outside and white on the inside. And it came to a point, like, you just have to say, I was like, I understand the decisions my parents made. Like, they had to make a decision in the 70s to raise their kids in a small northern town in northern Ontario to the best of their abilities. And I'm not going to fault them. They had to make those hard decisions. But you can't blame me for my upbringing if I don't know what my native language is. And also, they don't have it on Duolingo, so I can't learn it. So yeah, so there's definitely, like, Chris, I hear you on your ABC. Granted, in Canada, we don't really have that, but it's interesting that we have similar stories.
Yeah, I echo that as well. I think that I've felt a disconnect between myself and other communities as well, and that feeling of not really knowing where I fit or I belong. I'm also, for me, interestingly, because 3 generations of my family were from East Africa, it adds another layer into, like, my self-identifying with East African culture, because I grew up around it all the time, in terms of subtle things, right, that I saw around my house, or the food I was eating, and not really knowing where it came from, and then thinking, like, but I'm not, like, I don't feel like I fit entirely with Indian, I don't feel like I fit entirely with East African, I don't know what I fit, where I fit. So that's been something that I still struggle with, really trying to grapple understand my identity in the context of North America, with the context of the fact that my family had to also teach me how to be more Western and white in order to make my life easier. So there's that. And then also within our cultures, there's a lot of anti-Black racism that exists in our community. So colorism is a really big factor. And I have become, over the years, far more increasingly aware of the way that anti-Blackness shows up within my community, and listening to the narratives from when I was younger, to stay out of the sun, or to scrub my skin hard enough and then I'll become lighter, or nice and light, or, fair and beautiful, and all of these narratives that I grew up around. And at the time, you think it's just well, they're just telling me that they want me to look beautiful, or it's a beauty thing. You realize, actually, no, this is rooted in beliefs around Blackness and around Black folks, and how those the belief of darkness being ugly, or seeing only dark actors play evil characters in movies, in traditional movies. It starts to you start to unpack that and realize how deep this can affect a person's psyche, and subconsciously our biases, and how that plays out into our relationships then with people who are of darker skin, people who are Black. And so it's really important, I think, for us to be aware of that dynamic that plays out in our communities as well.
Yeah, so I grew up in Malaysia. And for those of you who are curious, why Malaysia is just above Singapore and just below Thailand. And I would say, as a very young girl and a dark-skinned Asian, growing up in a country like most Asian countries that likened beauty to being fair-skinned, that was a struggle. Especially took a big hit on my confidence level, because I grew up watching, girls in my classroom, etc., that are fairer skinned get more attention. And, kind of similar to what Sabrina is saying, my mom bought this cream called Fair and Lovely and made me use it as I was growing up, so that, in hope that I would become lighter skinned. But I would say people are not born with knowledge of how discrimination manifests or how to prevent and address it. And I think education is a necessary precondition for proper functioning of anti-discrimination mechanisms. So if people can't recognize discrimination, then they can't address it. And so what good is a complaint procedure, for example, if people don't know what to bring to it, and if those investigating a case don't know what they're trying to address and why? So I think logically, the first question to ask is, what is the state of education on discrimination? And for me personally, as I encounter unconscious bias, etc., I found this to be useful. I just say, well, tell me more when I hear those comments. And what I've discovered is 9 out of 10 times people actually don't know what they're saying. And so when you say, oh, tell me more, and you get them to actually explain their thought process, they actually find themselves going, hang on a minute, maybe that wasn't right in what I first came out of my mouth, and they weren't really thinking about it.
That is a beautiful way of uncovering and dismantling, right? My mom is from Malaysia, so I used to live in Malaysia, and I used to work in Singapore as well. And I had very similar experiences. I'm of darker skin tone, and I was constantly called the blackie, and it leaked into every phase that I belonged in, right? And in Malaysia, it's like my Malay friends who call me blackie. I forgot how to speak Malay, but never mind. And in Singapore, it was always, I had lots of Chinese friends, and it was always, oh, you're dark, get out of the picture. And it was hurtful. As hurtful as it was, I was really curious as to unraveling why are these narratives being repeated, not just in Southeast Asia and every other country that I had belonged in. I kept on hearing these repeated narratives in a cycle, to a point where I started asking, why? Why do you say so? Why do you believe so? And in this point, as people start thinking about it, they can't really make sense to it, because these are all behaviors or narratives that have been mirrored as to what we see on the telly, or what is acceptable. When one person passes it as a joke, we just kind of like adopt it. I learned the lingo in America, get out. What is it, shut up or get out? The first time I moved to the United States, and my husband is from Wisconsin, so we used to live in Wisconsin. And his family said, shut up to me, and I got so offended, and I literally shut up. And I was like, what? So my husband was like, oh no, that's just the lingo. So I started using it without even questioning. As other people got offended, and one day someone asked me, why are you asking me to shut up? And as I was reasoning it sounded really dumb to me, because we adopt behaviors that we don't question, and we mirror it, we recreate it, we transfer it without even questioning it. And these kind of behavior leaks into the workspaces. So I want to take a moment and pass it to the workspace. And I know each of you are doing fantastic work in your area, right? But in your spaces, I'm curious to hear, how have you identified discrimination, let it be systemic discrimination or verbal discrimination, and how have you navigated through them, through this discourse landmine, or how have you helped someone else navigate it by dismantling them?
So I can kick us off. So let me see. I remember when I was younger, when I first started my career in tech, I didn't see anyone in my department that looked like me, especially those in leadership positions. So one of the responsibilities I'm taking upon myself now is to be that role model for young women who are entering the workforce, so they see someone who's speaking up, speaking on behalf of them, or who have shared similar obstacles in their life. But also I realize my responsibility, we all talked about how we were told to stay out of the sun. We were told not to get any darker. So let's take a step back and realize that the racism behind that, and realizing really being allies with the Black Lives Matter movement, and using our voice in order to teach our communities, our Asian communities, about why this movement is important in this time in history, and why we have to stand with them. Because it doesn't just, they're not in a bubble. like, you know, they're not in a bubble, they're not, it has impacted all of our lives. So, and I have to admit, this is something that I am continuously trying to learn more and more about systemic racism, but I am trying my best to make a point that when I learn something, that I am sharing it so that the volume of these issues become louder, and so that we can talk about it more. Because like these conversations are happening everywhere, and people just have to find them. So the more of these conversations happening, like the bigger the movement is. Like every single thing counts. So that is kind of like my little part of helping navigate through this systemic discrimination, and using my influence with my community of, like, you know, being an ally to Black Lives Matter, giving them a voice at the table, and then really just saying, hey, let's build this new table, like, together. It doesn't have to be necessarily Asian people together. Like, let's open it up, because the rules were never built with us in mind. So I want to make sure that the next set of rules is built with everyone in mind. So.
I can go next. You know, reflecting on the question around how do I in my space identify discrimination, and then how do we approach that? I think the first step is to recognize that I myself, because of the privilege that I carry, can't identify all discrimination on my own without listening. I think listening is such a powerful and necessary skill that we need to tap into all the time. And really try to hush the narratives in our head, the biases, our tendency to think we know. What I found a lot of is, you know, a lot of people like to make assumptions about other communities, and those people who make the assumptions don't come from those communities. And so it's, you know, it's really a lot of us projecting our biases, projecting our the narratives that we grew up with onto other folks without really listening and hearing what the lived experiences are actually telling us. So I think in my space, you know, looking at workplaces and looking at the types of conversations that arise around racism, sexism, ableism, all of these different facets, it's really important for us to, one, be aware of the identities that we carry, the privilege that we carry, in addition to our marginality, to know that we're intersectional beings. And then two is to listen, to intentionally learn, to seek out information on your own. You know, every time a question pops into your head, like, do I have white privilege? Google it. And there's this resource that's available to all of us, to many of us, I'd say those who have digital access, to really be able to go online and to try to discover the answers for ourselves. And I think that's a really important piece here, is not to push the learning to expect others to teach us, but when we don't know, to Google something, and when somebody decides to tell us, for us to listen.
Yeah, so for me, I decided to focus on gender, specifically on driving diversity in the workplace. So 4 years ago, myself and Helen Deuce, two complete strangers that met in INSEAD, who are non-Singaporeans, decided to start a movement in Singapore off the back of being inspired by the book Lean In, written by Sheryl Sandberg in 2013, where she was curious about why, after so much progress was made with women, whether it was right to vote or the ability to drive in some countries and breaking the glass ceiling, everything came to a halt. And today, you know, we started with 2 people. Today, we're a community of 4,000 men and women here in Singapore. Thank you, Melanie, for the little virtual clap there. And we focus on 3 things. Firstly, what women can do to help themselves. And we talk about the sticky floor, so the biases that we impose on ourselves that are holding us back. And, you know, I can certainly relate to this in so many ways, especially with imposter syndrome. I remember 4 years ago when I first got my vice president title. In the first 3 days at a job, I sat at my desk and I was like, oh my God, like they're going to figure out who I really am. And then, you know, like I'm this imposter and I don't belong here. And I think a lot of women struggle with that. So we talk about things like that and give tools, etc. The second is about what managers can do in the workplace. And given most organizations and leaders today are mainly men, they play an absolutely critical role to eliminate unconscious bias at work. So for example, we talk about the office housework, how women more often than not are asked to take notes in meeting, organize team outings, and we find ourselves maybe clearing the cups after the meeting when we were able to do physical meetings. And so rotate the office housework so that everyone has a go at it. And lastly, what organizations can do to break unconscious bias. So for example, when you are putting out a new role that you want to hire, be very clear about the criteria for the role. Like if you say 15 years experience, like why do you need 15 years versus 10? And if you say, I'm going to prefer education over experience, then why do you say that? And then don't shift the criteria in a role that might seem to be more in your head going to a male person. So let's say you're hiring an engineer and the first image that comes to your mind is probably a guy. And then you shift your criteria to hire a guy because that's what you're comfortable with versus a woman because you didn't follow the criteria. And I think what we all found, just kind of echoing there what Sabrina was saying, is that we all have privilege and platform. No matter who we are, what we do, where we live, what our background is, where we're going. We all have privilege and platform, and we can do something with it. And so recognizing that we all have biases and openly speak about them is something that we felt opened up everyone here in Singapore and brought this community to 4,000 people over 4 years.
Yeah, Uma, I totally agree with that, right? All of us have these biases, and I think the first thing that we all need to admit is A, we have them, and B, recognize the impact that it has and start working on them, right? We need to understand that this is not just a certain group that has these biases. This affects everyone. We all have these things that, these ideas in our minds about other people, no matter what group they're in or they identify with. So we need to admit that. And we need to show vulnerability through that. It is okay to be vulnerable. It is okay to show or say, hey, I do not know about this. And something that Sabrina touched on, right, is we need to learn. We need to be able to be willing to learn and listen to others. We need to reach out to those people and find out what we can do or how we can use our own privilege to, promote or partner with others who might be disenfranchised. And, as far as identifying discrimination, I mean, first thing is if you see it, you need to call it out. You absolutely have to call it out. Letting it slide by just shows that you are okay with it. If you're uncomfortable with it, that means there's something wrong. Like you need to do something about it. And so we have to call it out. We have to be willing to have that courage to say that is not okay. And by doing so, that draws a line in the sand to everyone, and that shows everyone that this is not an okay behavior. And so when we do that, I do think that that gives more power to the people that we are trying to help. That also allows us to shine the spotlight on other groups to say, I recognize you. And, similar to how what I've seen from a gender equality piece is that, men should be helping and putting the spotlight on women, right? A lot of times we've seen women speak up in a meeting and then get ignored or, just kind of passed over. As a man, I have that duty to say, hey, this person had a fabulous idea. I think, hey, I think I want to hear more about what you have to say about that. We need to be doing the same thing about other groups as well, right? Melanie, I think you touched on it, is as an Asian community, we need to put that spotlight on and our support behind the Black Lives Matter movement. We need to shine that spotlight on them. And as we bring that into the workplace, we need to give that voice and our own platform within the workspace to those people. We need to ask them, hey, what do you think? What is your opinion on this matter? And if they are not comfortable having that one-on-one conversation to say, okay, well, like, I'm sure like you have an idea about what to do in this situation, whether or not it's related to, diversity and inclusion work, but, maybe it's just a project or something. But we need to give those people a voice and tell them to show them that you have their back, not to speak for them, but to show that you have their back and that you're willing to speak up for them.
Those are really deep thoughts from everyone. I am at a loss right now because it's like I feel so overwhelmed with all of your love, like all of your advocacy. But I want to touch on all the pieces that each of you highlighted, right? And the themes of, I'm going to say passing the mic, because now that's the campaign getting passed the mic. Melanie, Chris, Sabrina, all three of you said pass the mic. Uma, you mentioned focusing on the gender. And you mentioned a really important point, imposter syndrome, right? I suffer with it every day. I suffer with it today, thinking, oh my God, who am I to host this show? Who am I to host this? I'm not even a great public speaker, right? I started doubting myself. And then I thought to myself, no, this is my mission. This is what I'm going to do. This is my voice. This is my platform. We all suffer from those syndromes. And in communities like POC communities, that could be Black communities or different types of colored communities, each person suffers imposter syndrome because they are not given the chance, or they are looked over, or they are passed over. To Chris, your point you mentioned about as a male, you have the social responsibility to say something. I think that's beautiful. In the spirit of the four ships, allyship, partnership, sponsorship, all four of you touched on allyship and partnership. Let's touch on sponsorship through heartship. How can we become sponsors? Not a mentor, because a mentor is so different than a sponsor. How can we each start from the grassroots level of our Asian community of being sponsored, then move up along the line to becoming larger sponsors to dismantle and then to enable diversity? I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I like that differentiation between sponsorship and mentorship. So I always say mentors advise and sponsors act. And for me personally, in the work that I do on progressing gender in the workplace, there are very small but powerful things that we can do. And one is doubling the voice. And we always talk to women about, whether you like it or not, the voice of a man is always going to be double of yours in a meeting, in forums, etc. And so find a way to double your voice of creating that allyship with another woman. And, you got to plan for these things, but also because you're not conscious about it. Now, obviously people who are conscious about it. So I do it. Now I got to agree with the idea, but I always try and double the voice of a woman and say, yeah, I absolutely agree with what Sabrina just said, because etc. And I've just doubled her voice and landed her point more strongly. And, we can also do this with men. It's even more powerful. And, coming back to imposter syndrome. So sometimes I go to my boss and say, okay, remember we talked about this. I'm going to bring it up in this forum. I'm going to need you to double my voice and echo on top of me. And it's just a really small thing, but it's a really powerful thing to do. But I would say the biggest, most impactful thing we've done with Lean In is the concept of circles. And a Lean In circle is a small group, usually 8 to 12 women. My own circle is 7 of men and women, mainly women today, who regularly meet to support one another and learn new skills together. And what's different between this and having a group of friends who are in a circle is that you hold each other accountable. You put a mirror to yourself and said, oh, Mila, right, you don't think that you can host this great forum that's talking about this? You absolutely can, and here's why. When someone says, oh, I looked at this job description and I don't think I qualify, because what women tend to do is they feel they need to check off everything before they apply. And men go like 6 out of 10, I'm going to rock this thing. And so the concept of circle is really going, yeah, you absolutely should apply. So pushing, women to do more and just holding them accountable to say, all right, if I'm going to have that tough conversation with my boss because he said something that really was, uncomfortable yesterday, then we're going to go, well, did you have the conversation with your boss? And let's role play what that's going to look like. And that's the power of circles. And, Cheryl says the future female leaders will come from circles. So that's what we're doing. We have over 100 circles. We launched them in corporates like Standard Chartered Bank. And, powerful thing about a movement, to your point, Mila, is my one friend that came to one lean-in event walked away and said, I've got to do something. She went to Standard Chartered Bank, said, all right, I am going to do something. I'm not going to wait for HR or some CEO executive in the bank to do something. I'm going to start this movement in the bank. She started it 2 years ago from Singapore. There's now circles in more than 20 countries in Standard Chartered Bank. And it's now an official D&I program. And it started with one person. And I think that's the power of a grassroots movement.
That's beautiful. Anyone else would like to share?
When I started the Women in Tech group here in Toronto, I remember I was doing kind of like a whiteboarding brainstorm session with some women in tech, and one of the questions kind of like, okay, what do you want from here? Like, let me sit back and let me listen and really find out what you would like to get out of the community from this. And at first, I just kind of defaulted to, more access to courses, or like, just ways to get promoted, like, just those like, career level type things. But the number one thing that came out of it was a community, creating a community where like-minded people can come together and really listen and learn from each other. And I love what you were saying about having the circles and that support, because it's having those supports, like the way I'm seeing it, because it's a circle, it's not a triangle, it's not a hierarchy. It isn't one person at the top dictating to those below them of how to navigate through their life. It's a constant communication, right? And really trying to help them shift the mindset from, there's a shift in the mindset where when you're approached with something different or something that, like, you're kind of afraid, like, oh my God, have I been doing something incorrectly? Am I going to get in trouble? Like, you're finding out that, like, you have your own unconscious bias, which we talked about, because we all have them. And just realizing that, but stepping away from them, that instead of being fearful of learning about that, changing the mindset to becoming more curious and about wanting to learn about it, because we're all human, we all make mistakes. And keeping that a safe place for people to learn and just know it, like, hey, I thought that too, and this is what I learned, let's talk about it. Like, oh, I never thought about it this way, like, this is my experience versus your experience, but that doesn't negate one experience is worse than the other, right? So yeah, just giving the people like a place to really listen and learn.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm happy to go next here. When we talk about sponsorship, for me, I immediately think about power and privilege dynamics and why that's so important in those spaces. So I think to be a really strong ally, advocate, supporter of folks from marginalized communities, it requires us to, there's so much power amongst marginalized communities if we were to be really great advocates and supporters for one another. And I think the way for us to tap into that power is by having an awareness of our privilege and power dynamics amongst ourselves. So being willing, even as a marginalized person, to recognize that in this room, I still carry a degree of privilege relative to somebody else, and I'm going to take a step back. And I think the challenge that we experience as we try to do this, and what I feel like is a really important hurdle to overcome, is that of the scarcity mindset. Because I think that we as folks from marginalized communities know what it's like to be discriminated against, know that there are limited seats that are available, that we're always trying to push for something better because we know that our chances of getting to X, it's harder for us. But it's also sometimes more harder for somebody else. And so it's really recognizing which spaces we carry privilege and where we need to take a step back, and recognizing that the journey is for the collective good. Diversity and inclusion at the end of the day will make it better for everyone. And if we keep our eyes on that, and we know that at the end goal, and we play the long game, and we know at the end of the day what we're going for is a better experience, better workplaces, better systems, better everything that works for everybody, I think that will serve as a powerful reminder to bring our awareness into these spaces and to advocate and take a step back in advocating for other folks. I think another piece to mention too is, Uma and Melanie mentioned spaces of safety and spaces of, where folks can come together in these circles and share and provide that support for one another. Employee resource groups are what a lot of organizations have or are starting to have, and they offer places where folks of similar identity can come together to share their common experiences, but also to help serve the business in terms of moving the organization forward, providing innovative new perspective to things. But one thing that I think is an opportunity when we look at employee resource groups, which I don't think many people are talking about, is how we can create intersectionality and allyship through those spaces, or recognize intersectionality and create allyship through employee resource groups, because they're often based on identity. So women, Black folks, people with different abilities, people, and they categorize us, but many of us carry more than one identity. And I think it's also important to recognize that as marginalized groups, then we have this power to say, like, how do we get behind another employee resource group, behind their purpose, and help champion that. So I think it's important for us, like when we start, I think silos are the problem. So if we stop thinking in silos and we start thinking about how we can really back one another, that we'll see progress.
Beautiful. Chris, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be real quick. I can't really say it better than, Uma, Sabrina, and Melanie. They said it fantastically. When it comes to sponsorship, again, it's important for us to really, I think, use our privilege and power, as Sabrina said, to enhance what others need or what they're looking for. Again, it's that buy-in. It's that, saying I'm willing to put my weight, whatever that weight is, in acting to help you, right? And so I think that that's really important because, Uma, it's great to hear that, the circles have worked out and it's started as a grassroots movement. I wonder what would have happened if there was an executive leader who had sponsored that. Would that have taken 2 years at that one organization? My feeling.
That's a good point.
My gut feeling would be no.
In Standard Chartered, the reason it percolated so quickly, to your point, Chris, is because there was a male executive sponsor that was sitting on the executive board of Standard Chartered Bank.
Yeah, and so again, it's important that we do find sponsors who are willing to help each other, and again, for us to act as sponsors for others. And so, and that takes commitment, and we have to understand that as well. There's a difference between saying, "Yep, I support you," and a whole nother thing to actually act on it. And I'll leave it at that.
Beautiful. It's been such a pleasure having all four of you on here. And I love how each of you shed light on how to be an ally, how to be a partner, a sponsor, and most importantly, all four of you touched on the importance of hardship. Hardship is about leading from the heart for other beating hearts. To truly dismantle discrimination, we need to understand how granular discrimination manifests in spaces in where POC exists. We have to start dismantling it at grassroots level, like how each of these brilliant humans today are doing, right? Where we do become allies, where we do become partners and sponsors through hardship. I truly am grateful that each of you are here today. Where can viewers find you on social? Melanie.
Where can people find me? So people can find me right here on LinkedIn, but really anyone can find me at Melanie de Guzman on all of the social media platforms, including melaniedeguzman.com.
Yep, and I'm at Umatana, and you can do that on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. Or more importantly, instead of me, Lean in Singapore, or Lean in general, leaninsingapore.com or leanin.org.
And for myself, you can find me on LinkedIn and also at designingforinclusion.ca. And also you can check out my podcast called the Inclusive Design Podcast.
And you can find me on LinkedIn, Christopher Lin.
Beautiful. Well, stay on the line, everyone. That's it for today. I will be back next week on part 3, Dismantling Discrimination and Enabling Diversity. The conversation is and will be with white communities. So please stay tuned. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Have a brilliant night and good morning in Asia Pacific.